This is Speak Up. I am Sandra Schulte. Welcome back to our show. Today, I have the greatest pleasure to have Peter Jussi back with us again. Peter Jussi specializes in geostrategic analysis. To me, that means the factors that are important to the defense of our country, keeping us safe, keeping us prosperous. Mr. Jussi has 55 years of experience in the factors that keep our nation safe and strong. They include the National Institute for Deterrence Studies. He was advisor to the Secretary of the Air Force, the Mitchell Institute of Aerospace Defense Studies. While at Columbia, he worked at the United Nations Environment Program's Office of Energy and the Environment. He has made numerous guest appearances on the John Batchelor Show. This is only a sample of the places where he has given his service. Peter, your specialty is geostrategic analysis. What does that mean?
It's a combination of what are strategic threats, which are the big ones, plus how is it affected by geography? Because you have to talk about places and the subject things. So it's a combination of the two. And it involves primarily Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. It involves nuclear, space, missile defense, and energy are the four areas I concentrate in, because I think those are the ones that are so connected, that are the most serious threats we face.
What happened in Europe in terms of oil and gas when Russia invaded the Ukraine, despite the Europeans moving towards renewables, and after they had closed down their coal mines?
Well, what's going on in this world is, this is what's here in New York, but also my former home state of Vermont and other states. There are about 13 states. They've decided they want to sue the oil and gas industry for the harm caused by climate change. Now, it's a swindle, but it's an artful swindle. And what they're going to measure it against is the tobacco settlement. They want to find a judge somewhere who will say, yes, the oil and gas industry didn't tell us how bad it is going to be with respect to climate change. So what Vermont did is from 1996 to 2024, they added up all the costs of hurricanes, earthquakes, tornadoes, floods, everything having to do with climate, multiplied it by some number, and they've come up with $21 trillion of damages. But here's the trick. They're selling shares into a hedge fund.
They're selling shares, oh my God.
To people to sign up saying, if we can get a judge to do a settlement like tobacco, whatever you give proportionately, you'll get back part of the settlement. So the states will get some money, the governors will get some money to spend, the state legislatures. But we want to find just one judge, and the assumption is that the oil and gas industry will cave, like the tobacco industry. Don't want to, fight City Hall. What's fascinating is that global warming was basically talked about, as well as global cooling, in the 1970s. It was the limits to growth time. When I was at the UN Environment Fund here in Washington, here in New York, at the UN, we did a study on this. And we came up with both the US and the world needed to basically, at that time, the world was US was using what are called quadrillion BTUs of energy. We were using probably around 40. Mm-hmm. We're now at 100, which is exactly what we predicted. And the world at the time was at basically not at 40, but like 120. And we said, for the world to come up just to the South Korean standard, you probably need 400 quads of energy. And we're not there. We're around 250 or thereabouts. So the idea that you can get to energy security by dramatically reducing the amount of energy. And when you ask about Europe, what's fascinating is we knew if Russia invaded Ukraine, natural gas imports from Russia would stop because of sanctions. So during the previous administration, we built export terminals in Maryland, Louisiana, and other places, so we could export liquefied natural gas to Europe precisely because we had, due to fracking, we had an enormous surplus.
Because we depend on our allies.
And we could help our allies. Well, what has happened, despite the sanctions against Russia, the price of oil is not $40 a barrel, it's $80 a barrel. So the price doubled, and a very small decrease in production because they're selling it to India and they're selling it to China at a discount, but that discount makes them more money than they previously made. So what was the point of the sanctions? All it did is increase production cost for us, for the consumer in America, and hurt our economy. And at the same time, this administration has shut down the Louisiana export terminal. We're not going to complete it. There's no uranium mining on public lands, on federal land. All oil and gas exploration on Alaska North Slope and on the offshore continental shelf and in public lands shut down. Keystone Pipeline stopped. Development in Anwar stopped. So we were at 13 million barrels of oil and gas produced in December 2019, just before COVID. That's where we are today. We're actually 13.2, something like that. But we have 15 million more people in this country, not including illegal immigration, and we have $5 trillion more GDP. So the question is, you got more economic growth, you got more people, and yet you got basically the same oil and gas production as you had, and therefore, why do you think the price has gone up from about $2.30 a gallon for regular gas to $3.70? And regular gas is one thing, but a lot of people don't use regular gas. Diesel, have you seen what the price of diesel is? And natural gas and so forth. So we're doing all the wrong things. We're shutting down energy production, and guess we're giving more power to the Middle East producers, meaning Iran and Iraq, and even though Saudi Arabia is a nominal ally, the problem is we no longer are the swing producer. We no longer can basically say, understand that things go wrong in the Middle East, we can overcome that because we have such big production. So we shouldn't be at 13 million barrels a day. We should be 16 million barrels.
And you might refer back to what happened in the 1970s when Saudi Arabia and
it was mainly Iran. The Shah of Iran was upset, and so he did the embargo.
That's right.
And what it cascaded into, oil went from a couple dollars a barrel, believe it or not, $2 a barrel, to like $6. Caused a huge shock and a recession. Same thing, 80, 81. Oil started getting up to $15, $16 a barrel. Recession.
Because the Middle East did an embargo.
Was another shock. And then in 91, during the invasion of liberation of Kuwait, we had a mild recession. And then same thing in 2000, and just before the turn of the century, of a millennium, we had another oil shock. Wasn't as bad, but then the mother of all oil shocks was 2008 and 9. Oil went to $154 a barrel.
What caused these shocks?
Well, it was supply interruptions.
Putin,
go to 2008 and 9. Mm-hmm. We kept seeing these Somalian, we called them pirates, grabbing oil tankers and then giving them back to the owners for ransom. Well, no one asked the question until years later. I think it was Senator John McCain. Mm-hmm. He asked the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He said, well, how the hell do these Somalian, they're Bedou. They're not pirates. They don't even know how to swim. How are they finding these tankers? And the admiral said, well, there are only two countries that can give them GPS, Russia and the United States. And I tell you, Senator, it ain't us. And so the coin dropped in the slot, and it was Russia's helping the Somalian Bedou grab tankers. Why? And I wrote, one of my first op-eds for Human Events was, Russia went to the OPEC meeting and said, you're producing too much oil, cut back so the price goes up. And OPEC said, you're not a member of OPEC, who the hell are you? Get lost. And so Mr. Putin said, oh, you want to get tough, huh? Can you? So they had Spetsnaz units of the Russian Navy train these Somalian pirates to go grab tankers and they grabbed the largest tanker in the world, the U.S. Sirius Star, owned by the Saudi Arabian government, biggest tanker in the world. And they grabbed it, and they asked for a ransom of $200 million. Previously, they were asking for $2 million, $3 million, peanuts. But they had lawyers in Britain, in their law firm, set up to accept the money. So this was very well coordinated. And the Saudis called the United States Navy and said, you got to help us because we ain't paying any $200 million because once we pay that, we'll keep paying forever. So God love our United States Navy. They waxed the Somalian pirates, got back the U.S. Sirius Star. But oil on July 4th, 2008, happy birthday, America, oil hit $148 a barrel, highest ever. We had this massive economic implosion, as you know, added into the real estate problem and all the Wall Street problems, okay? And had a massive recession and changed the nature of politics in America. And we got elected Barack Obama. So the world, oil has, if you look at since 1975, every single recession we have had has been caused by a spike in oil prices.
Because oil has been shut down by major countries.
By countries. Countries own most of the oil in the world.
So we say the OPEC area nations.
Mainly, Russia is, at that time in the 70s, was one of the biggest producers. Mm-hmm. But OPEC then is mainly the Middle East, plus Indonesia, plus Malaysia, plus Angola. It's basically worldwide.
And fracking, when did fracking start?
Fracking started in the early 1980s, and it really boomed after 2000. And George W. Bush, 43, decided not to have the federal government regulate it. It was mainland private land or state land, and he made the smart decision, let it go. And 70% of our oil and gas now is produced by fracking.
And wasn't that what made the difference when we had when the OPEC nations shut the oil pipelines down?
What happened is that
down?
with fracking the way it was, when Richard Nixon was president, we peaked at about 10 million barrels a day. Mm-hmm. And by the time Mr. Obama left office, we were down to 5. When Trump left office, we were 13. And that was fracking. 70% of the oil and gas production in the country is due to this. And it's basically, instead of burning the rock, which we thought originally we were going to have to melt this stuff because the oil was embedded in the rock. Well, someone had the smart idea, why don't you just blast it with water? And you have to blast it in a very narrow area. You have to be very careful of the lining you do it. And that is what's produced an enormous boom. And that gave us the leverage. We basically control the price of oil worldwide. Now, one of the things that does is dramatically strengthen the U.S. currency. But what are we reading about in the news now? 48 countries led by China want to get away from the dollar as the universal currency and go to the Chinese funny money. Which, can you imagine having to buy a barrel of oil, you got to buy Chinese money first? It's going to be very, very expensive and give China an enormous amount of leverage. Oil production is geared to the value of the dollar. The value of the dollar is geared to the inflation, which is also geared to the price of gold, believe it or not. So being stupid when it comes to oil and gas production also means you're being stupid on monetary policy, and you're giving the bad guys enormous leverage over what you're having to do. Plus, all the things you're doing to shut down oil and gas production in America. And then when you're running low on gas and the price is going up, what do? You call on Venezuela to produce more oil and gas, which is very heavy oil and gas. It's very heavy, full of sulfur. And then you say, okay, well, Iran, you produce more. Wait a minute, aren't we embargoing Iran because of their support of the Houthis, which we'll get to later? So all the countries in the world that are the bad guys, we're urging them to produce more oil and gas because we don't want to here, because politically we don't want to be accused of producing quote unquote greenhouse gases, okay? Which gets us into the old issue of, okay, where are we on this? This is a pretty simple deal. The world produces 53 billion tons of greenhouse gases. The United States, somewhere around 5. Europe, somewhere around 5. Both Europe and the United States have cut 1 billion per year. So we've gone from 6 to 5 in both cases. So the question is, what about China? China's around 15 billion tons a year.
Don't they open a lot of coal mines
They
every
produce
year?
every 30 days, they build a no coal-fired plant. Which has got to put coal in to use, okay?
That's right.
India is somewhere around 4 billion tons. They use energy in a very limited way because they're very poor, even though they have more people now than China. But they're building almost a similar number of coal-fired plants every month as is China. So then you ask yourself, this whole global climate thing is, by the year 2100, it's 75 years, we're meant to go from worldwide 52, 53 billion tons to basically 30. That supposedly is going to cut the temperature from going up 4 degrees centigrade, it'll only go up 2 degrees centigrade. Okay, how do you get to 30 if China and India combined are going to hit 30 by themselves? According to their own plans, because they're not going to go to energy poverty. And even if you look at Africa, half the country, half the continent of Africa has no access to electricity. 0. And that has an enormous impact on something very important: fresh water, potable water. And that is key to famine and child mortality. Because if the waterborne illnesses don't get curtailed, you have dehydration and you have famine. Children can't keep down the food. So we're basically telling Africa, you're going to not only be not prosperous and be energy poor and energy starvation, but a lot of your children are going to die, which is beyond stupid. But he even gets dumber. Denmark decided, because cows produce methane gas when they burp and when they fart, they're going to tax cow farts. So every time you have any guy in Denmark that has a cow, you're going to be taxed $245 a year per cow. Well, I just had some fun. We have 54 million cows in America for beef and milk, about 50-50. And if you then add $245 per cow per year, you're talking about $22 billion, which means a gallon of milk will go up 50 cents and a pound of meat will go up 50 cents for everybody. And overall, you're talking about $300 or $400 a year added costs. But what if the argument being, if we don't need 100 quads of energy, which is what we use a year. In 1975, when I did the study of the UN, we're using 40. And that is, 40 is, if you just did renewables and nuclear and hydro, you could produce maybe 40 quads of energy. Well, how do you cut 60 quads of energy, 60% of your energy? If you double energy prices, electricity prices in America and energy, the cost per family is not going to be $18,000 a year. It's going to be $36,000 a year. Where do people have the extra $18,000? Okay, now, give you another example, not just taxing cow farts. Sri Lanka decided, since nitrogen fertilizer is made with natural gas, they would stop the production of nitrogen fertilizer. Well, the farmers rebelled because they said, you're going to put us out of business. So they marched on the Capitol. This is fascinating. And they went to the Prime Minister's house, who proposed this, and they burned his house down. Now, he wasn't in it. He had fled. So then the Netherlands said, we're going to do this too. And they had the same, all the guys with tractors. The Netherlands produces more food per acre than any other place in the world. Not just food, but flowers and all sorts of crops. Very energy intensive. And I don't know where they recently had elections which the ruling folks that were thrown out and the people with common sense. But Canada wants to ban nitrogen fertilizer, which means they're going to starve because rain-fed agriculture without any fertilizer is like, are you crazy? Because center pivot irrigation is propelled by what? Natural gas. So if you get energy, agriculture is very energy intensive. That's why when energy prices go up, food prices go up quite dramatically. And we already know energy prices went up 34% from 2020 to 2021. And we saw what that did to inflation. Saw what that did to the, now you want to buy a home, instead of buying a mortgage rate at 3%, you got to pay 7.5%, which I was thinking of refinancing, building a home out in near Gettysburg, and I would pay an extra $2,000 a month, almost doubling my mortgage payment, including taxes and everything on that, just to move to further out from Washington, D.C., 80 miles versus 15, which I can do because I don't have to be in D.C. that much. So when you look at everything we're doing, it's playing in the hands of those who are producing energy, like China, like India. I don't see as an enemy, but we're giving Iran and Russia, the big energy producers, and Iraq and other kind of Venezuela, we're giving them a huge amount of money, ka-ching, ka-ching, in their pocket, which otherwise would not be there. At the same time, we supposedly are meant to have sanctions, given the fact that Iran, North Korea, China, and Russia are all fighting the Ukraine war together, plus helping the Houthis, which are the terrorists in Yemen, grab not only tankers and stuff, but also shooting rockets at people. So they're saying that the Chinese have they're very clever. They're saying, yes, you can use the oceans for freighter and tankers, but you have to buy our rules, meaning you can only go to these ports. You can't.
Now, how do they control that? Would you explain?
Well, one of the things they do is they grab ships. They say, here are the deals.
How do they do that?
Well, they have GPS.
Which is controlled by the satellites.
Satellites. And the only people that have that are the United States, Russia, and maybe China. The Houthis don't have GPS. So they grab tankers and freighters and say, here are the rules. We're a toll road. If you pay the toll, you get to go through the Suez Canal and the Red Sea. And if you don't play by the rules, you got to go around Africa, which raises, according to Maersk, the Danish shipping company, the largest shipping company in the world, it raises the price by 40%, which means those who don't play by the rules are at a disadvantage. Their freight costs go up 40%.
And the rules are basically...
And the Chinese basically are saying, we are making the rules. We're the big guys.
We're extorting you.
we're the toll road on the oceans. Now, 90% of all trade goes on the oceans. Airplanes get there quicker, but there's not anywhere near as capacity.
Yes.
You can fly all the planes you want, but if you're talking about international trade, you have to talk about ocean-going shipping. And this brings me to the next part, which is really quite interesting. It's often said, don't militarize space. You know, America, peaceful uses of space. And it's often said, we have to have peaceful uses of the ocean. Let's do a little history. When John Kennedy became president in 1960, the total amount of tons of commercial shipping on the ocean, worldwide, everything, was 280 million tons. What is it today? 12 million billion. Okay? A factor of about 50 times. Now, who patrolled the oceans during that entire period and made them safe for commerce? The United States Navy. We militarized the oceans to make them safe, just like you put police in the neighborhood to keep crime down. What happens when police withdraw?
Crime goes up.
What happens when you defund the cops?
Crime goes up.
Okay? Same thing in the oceans. If there's no consequences for piracy and bad behavior, piracy will go up. Yes. And recklessness on the other. Now, the thing is, the Houthis are engaging in piracy, as is Russia, as is China. What's the one crime you don't have to go to a jury or a judge? Piracy. If you do piracy, I can grab you on the high seas, take your captain, hang him, and make him walk the plank and shoot him. That's it. And I, as a captain of the ship that grabs him, total authority. It's recognized in international law. But why are we letting the Houthis, the Iranians, the Chinese, and Russians get away with basically piracy?
Because we're worried about
escalation. Now that gets to what
Satellites
I do.
being shut down.
What I do for a living, which is deterrence. If you don't deter bad actors doing bad things, they will continue to do bad things and escalate. In 2014, Putin invaded Ukraine. Instead of helping Ukraine, America put an embargo on arms to Ukraine. Said anybody who sends arms to Ukraine, you can't do business with America. And then we relented and we decided, well, we'll send them blankets. What do you think Putin thought about that?
Left.
Said, well, if I can take Crimea in 2014, and then Mr. Trump got elected, and it was like, I don't think I'm going to risk
I think what the worst thing is
going after him. So in 2022, in December 2021, just a couple months before, the administration was asked, well, what are you going to do if Mr. Putin invades Ukraine? And the answer was, well, it depends on how much he takes. Now, this was just days after saying Ukraine should join NATO. Well, wait a minute. Why do you want him to join NATO if you're going to let Putin grab a little bit? Well, a little bit in our eyes may not be the same as what Mr. Putin thinks. So what did he do in February 2022? He took the Donbass region and other part, okay, and he basically thought was, well, you kind of gave me a green light. And to me, that is the most dangerous thing, is if you lose deterrence, meaning consequences for bad things, as Victor Davis Hanson has written, it's very, very difficult to get back. And when you look at world trade, that the Houthis are basically thumbing their nose at the world, but China's in the background. They're the big shots. You're talking about 11 billion tons of trade. Almost 2 billion tons is oil and gas, about a sixth. And you're talking about a value in the trillions, $2 trillion oil and gas traded every year. And you're giving the bad guys the opportunity to go after it. And if China controls that, America loses access to the entire Pacific.
Peter, I want to thank you so much. This has been very, very, very educational.
Thank you.
This is Speak Up. I am Sandra Schulte. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the day. Goodbye.